record it here. So, and then Dan Wessner has an admission summary from Vietnam. Dan, I think I'll probably let you summarize that. I know you sent it to me, but I think it's better.
Yeah, I have it on my screen if you just let me screen share at the right time.
Yeah, right, from you. And then just a couple other, we want to readdress, I think, the ideas of learning streams, of points and learning outcomes. I know that we had a lot of discussion on Friday about that, and just to make sure we're clear about it and give people the opportunity to ask more questions or get clarification or raise more concerns on those. And then I think we wanted to address the issue of the Zoom times again. Dan, I know you had a question about that, just how that works out among the different, the PRC, ACC, and PSK. So anything else before we really get started that people want to make sure to address? Okay. Daniel, are you back on? I guess we'll just go ahead and.
Hey, I'm connecting with Luke. He had the wrong Zoom meeting.
Oh, he did. Okay, he didn't see what I just sent out. Okay. All right. Well, let's just wait. A good question that Ruben had that I would just like to confirm is he asked about the role of specialization directors. And I have my own thoughts on that, but I just wanted to make sure, especially with Luke and Dan, that you have the same understanding of that. So well, I guess we'll wait till Luke gets on for that. I really feel like it's counterproductive to to start on some of these with that, because Luke is such an important player. Kelly, is there anything that you want to go over again in the meeting? Okay, Luke's on?
Not really. I mean, there's plenty, but.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Luke, are you there now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to take care of a couple. Before getting into some of the issues that we had Friday, I'd like to go over admissions and also what I was just mentioning. Ruben had a question about the exact role of specialization directors, because in his course, he used RADs a lot, especially to help with the community labs. And so I think we need to clarify the role of specialization directors. Is that similar to RADs? Now, my understanding, and certainly Dan will pitch in here as the president, that the role of specialization directors is to advise and mentor students and to help shape the policy and curriculum of the specific specializations.
Yeah, I would like to jump in on this.
Okay.
I think that the first role is not advising and mentoring, but it's shaping the curriculum. The RAD was, I mean, I think you've got the RAD position in a lead position there. The specialization director, I believe, is bringing essential and determinative, let me use that word, understanding of what the specialization should achieve. And I think in a very key and fundamental way, this is necessary for making our specialization fit or scratch where it itches, to use the phrase that we so often bring. And so, for instance, I think it would be presumptuous and ill-informed for any of us really to tell Dan Wessner what is needed in Vietnam. And you know, we've got somebody who's got 30 years of specific experience and knowledge in that field. And so I think that we are looking here with specialization directors. I'm going to create a parallel here to the person who would be the department chairman in a university in charge of what happens in that department. And department chairs have a lot of power and control over the direction of a department and in a conventional university. And so that's the parallel that it seems to me is appropriate, because otherwise you have, as would happen in a university, you don't want the English department telling the physics department how to run their department. That's not to say that the English faculty cannot and should not have a vote in that process, but they really this requires area expertise, and I think that if we get down into a groupie, everybody all equal the situation here, we're going to in fact lose the degree of connectedness of learning that the student is receiving to make our degree effective. So I have some pretty strong feelings on this. This must be clear by what I just said. And I think it's really important that the two specialization directors that are on this call, or three, Christy, with yourself and Luke and Dan, speak wearing the hat of specialization director. I mean, I guess I'm a specialization director too at this point for the eco-civilizations one.
Yeah,
But
let's let Dan and Luke talk to that then, because I think this is pretty important, especially given Ruben's concern that there be somebody that can, well, that's familiar and that's closer than 1,000 miles away from students to be able to help advise on things like community labs. Dan and Luke.
Well, in Gunta, for instance, I would like to look to somebody like Dr. Hip as a regional person with 30 years experience teaching languages in a development context of the Delta. So I agree with Daniel that I've got 30 years experience, and Dr. Hip has 30 years experience different than mine because he's Vietnamese and he's been there the whole time. And he's my former grad student from long ago. So he and I are co-teaching, and that's purposeful because we want to marry two very different sets of knowledge and skills that are focused on Vietnam. We also have somebody like Mr. Guan, who's in Hanoi and participates irregularly with our local coordinating committee. Sometimes we spend as much time explaining to Guan what we talked about at the last two meetings. But he's always somebody who gives us knowledge of Hanoi that we otherwise don't have. So that's invaluable. So wearing my other hat, working on the narrative of the HLC thing, I hope we haven't dismissed RADs entirely, because they have a certain contextual knowledge and relationship, which is different than a specialization director.
Dan, very important. I'm just saying we shouldn't confuse the two roles.
Agreed.
The specialization director, to my mind, is the department chair.
Well, the problem, and this was why when Dan, speaking to your role as HLC, when Eric was asking about it, I said that essentially the specialization directors have replaced the RADs, because we don't have RADs. We don't have FREO. Luke is a specialization director now, not a RAD, and Nawang is not acting as a RAD. So I don't think that in HLC we can mention RADs, and I don't think that we don't have that position to rely on as support for courses. And so that's why
that's the narrative I'm hearing, but I also don't know that we ever went through any formal procedure dismissing the RADs. And that's how it gets difficult for somebody trying to write the narrative.
Yep.
Because I don't see the chain of decisions there.
Yeah, you're right. There has not been a formal decision of one way or another. As somebody who holds both the title of specialization director and RAD, I can tell you my contract still says RAD. My business card still says RAD. Now I understand I'm also the only rad still employed or employed full time. So, you know, not having the other two kind of makes it hard for me to just, you know, I'm not providing localized knowledge to Africa. So, and having done both roles, I do think they are a bit different in how the specialization director is coming forward. So, I mean, I'm back to this question because I do think it's an important point that needs to be clarified administratively. That's a CEO point. You know, once again, if we really don't have RADs anymore, my job description's fundamentally changed. I'd like to also see that updated in my contract. And I'm sure no one would as well. But I see a lot of parallels with it, certain key roles, Christy. I certainly think some of the, you know, I hear the point about administrative oversight, but I do also see there being some obvious roles for the specialization directors when it comes to certainly anything disciplinary oriented, the way we used to have to kind of come at it from both sides, Christy. You know, students aren't performing, they're not delivering. You as CAO, me as RAD, or me as specialization director, I think there would still be a kind of two-way approach to that. I think the biggest question, and I have certainly been assuming as both a specialization director and a faculty member, that I would be more involved than just a regular faculty member in the overall coursework. Now, whether or not that really goes to where at times the RADs almost functioned as like a TA or instructor. And so I guess Ruben may be even more helpful. You know, I think one thing is, let's not overthink this as well. We're still a small school. We're not going to have a huge number of classes, and we all want to help one another. So Ruben, in particular, what kinds of direct support were you indicating or thinking of in relationship to the labs? Because I think there's a number of ways for us to, whether it's specialization directors, but if, you know, what you want is localized knowledge, maybe it's using alumni or peer-to-peer student networking. And I think that, you know, since this is more a teaching call and not an administrative one, that would be the more helpful for all of us to be thinking. Because I'm also thinking, you know, how do we do the labs? How do we grade the labs? So,
But Ruben, I don't want to, I am interrupting. Let me just say, let me clarify, we have not gotten rid of the RADs. Nawang is still listed and has a contract as a RAD. He's working very hard to mobilize Nepalese and Bhutanese students. And Luke is doing the same. We have an ongoing relationship with Freo. He still holds a faculty position. He's eager to support students in East Africa. If the Scout program is developing, we will need somebody to specifically coordinate and link to the Scouts, even if they're clustered in several different ways. Ruben has brought up a very essential issue, because if we don't have some sort of teaching assistant that is knowledgeable in the area, such as Dan Wessner described, we're moving to an online program. And we are getting away from the distinctive feature of our institution, which is that we are community-based learning. And we must not and cannot, because that is essential to our HLC degree. We have been given this, that we have been acknowledged that we are community-based. So we have to keep, while we've gotten away from mandatory residentials, we've not gotten away from residentials. And while we have gotten away from the three part of the world focus that we had with 3 RADs for each focus, we cannot get away from keeping the emphasis that our primary locus of learning is local.
Dan,
and therefore we need a faculty member as an intermediary. So I just,
This is an administrative decision that we need to make, though, because I can't call on Frail like I could call on him before when he was employed by the institution. It's not the same
right.
as before, and so I think that's a really important separate discussion that we need to have then administratively, and then that gets reflected in the HLC report, because we might have RADs, but they're not active as they were before, and so I really don't know now how to make this work functionally and practically, and I don't think it's clear now how to write it up in the HLC document, because I can't call on the RADs in the same way as I did before.
Well, you've got 2 RADs. You just don't have Frail. And you and I need to have a discussion that perhaps is just simply between you and me, because you need the support, Christy. I'm not saying you don't. We need to appoint an interlocutor that allows us to achieve our HLC mandate of having locally based learning.
Yeah. Well, the RADs even told me to take that part out of the faculty handbook. So I think there's some conflicting messages here that we need to clear up, because it's good to talk about it on a philosophical basis about having that local support and calling it a RAD, but when we get down to the pragmatic and functional basis of how they work within the program, we've got some problems there. It hasn't been clarified, and it needs to be clarified in job descriptions also.
Okay, well, let me clarify now that in my mind, the RAD has not been taken away.
And so should that be reflected in the faculty handbook?
Yes, it should be reflected that we need to have a local person for every region of the world, and we probably were going to have sort of at some point, maybe, Kelly sitting there with a smile on her face, we might have somebody who works for all the outlier regions or something. But Ruben and all other faculty members need to know they have somebody who will help with localizing the learning. Otherwise, we lose our essential feature vis-a-vis HLC. So I need to, it's a need that you and I need to solve, Christy. And I'm very, very appreciative that you're bringing it up. And a lot of the design is in place. We need to implement it by staffing a few positions and clarifying who those people are.
And that needs to happen right away.
It can happen on Monday of next week. Ken, I don't want to do it online, but I will be in the office on Monday and Tuesday.
All right, because I see that we have the main issue here is Africa, I guess. If we can still use Nawang, we don't have a specific person in place for Africa. Ruben, did you want to add anything to these concerns? Because I appreciate that you're the one that really brought this up.
No, my question, this discussion, went away from my question. My question was simply that in order to assess the work of the students and to respond to the problems that the students may have in the regions, in last year, we relied on the RADs, particularly in the assessment of the community labs. It's impossible for me to assess the work of the students, what they do in their communities, if I am not there. Basically, nothing. I cannot judge the activity. The only thing I can look at is the proof of learning, the artifact at the end, which is different, but it's what I have. Okay, I cannot supervise, I cannot observe, I cannot know what they are doing. But this clarifies what the discussion clarifies, that yes, in Nepal we will have Nawang, but I want to be sure that we have him. I want to be sure that if I ask him to do something for me, to look at something, what a problem students have, he will be available. Okay. The discussion on specialization came because you told me, Christy, that perhaps this role could be done by the specialization director, but according to the description of the role now, it's not the role. The role is completely different. The role of the specialization director is a sort of chair of the department, which is not a RAD here. On this second point, well, I don't think it's the time to discuss if we need or we don't need a chair of department in a small university. But this is not the discussion for today.
Okay, Paula, could you reflect on the notes as action steps that we need to clarify roles of RADs and specialization directors, and that we need to also have reflect that in contracts?
Let me just say, Ruben, as both a specialization director and a RAD, I'm happy to help in either capacity at any time with localized grading.
And Christy, for good form and input, let's make this part of our next Dean's Council.
Okay.
Thanks.
So so agenda item for Dean's Council. Okay, great. And the Dean's Council is on the 14th, so that will be, that's pretty good timing there. Okay, anything else on that? Thanks, Ruben, for bringing that up, and thanks, Daniel, I'm glad you're here to help add clarification to that.
This is a very important topic, and I thank everybody because we need to create a structure here that builds consistently on past decisions. And we had a glitch that was clarified here, and I really appreciate people bringing it to this attention.
Okay. All right. I'd like to go to admissions now because I think this is a pretty straightforward thing that we can talk about, and then get on to a couple of the more the items with gray areas. So Jody communicated to me where we're at with admissions, and Luke, if you have anything especially to add here to clarify, feel free to jump in. We have, at this point, we have 17 that are admitted. 2 have deferred to the next, to the August class 2020. 1 withdrew for financial reasons. We have 3 more applications to review. Abra, Haley, Giddy, Lychell, Schroeds, is that right, Luke? And Heather Nichols. So 2 of these, I think, are at least they're U.S. and 1 is AmeriCorps, I think.
One, yeah. Lychell's a Vista out of Wheeling, and Heather is a former student at Eric, friend of Rosie's, and was the best participant in the Grow the Change certificate over the summer out of Harrisonburg. Both are planning to do the program, and we're excited about that. So. Yeah,
so we need to review those applications. I don't know anything about this other one. We still need to look at it. So 17 admitted. Assume if we were to admit the 3 of them, that would make 20 admitted students. I don't see a problem with Lychell and Heather probably, so we'll have at least 19 admitted, I think. And then going on to the financial aid summary from that, 9 of these have accepted their financial aid awards. 6 have made deposits. 1 is arranging to pay online, and so essentially we probably have about 7 that have paid deposits so far. The deadline was the 1st of February, so these are kind of late, but they're still coming in. 4, yeah.
Wasn't it the 4th?
What's that?
I thought that the deadline was the 4th.
Maybe
I thought the 4th was the deadline, so that's a little better in terms of collecting.
Okay. Maybe that was okay. 4, we've had several that have asked for revised tuitions, and we've gone back and we've revised some of those depending on what they have made, what their financial aid application looked like, and waiting on 3 financial aid applications. So if I were to give just a ballpark figure of the number from this general applications process that would end up actually matriculating, I might say 12 to 14, something like that, given our past record of, because of course we all know that just the fact that they're admitted doesn't mean that they're going to actually matriculate in the class. So any questions about that? Jody's done a good job of tracking all this.
Is the Vietnam crowd in that group?
No, I'm going to have Dan speak to the Vietnam crowd. This has included probably, at least one Scouts application. We didn't admit one of the Scouts application. It just was not a strong application. So.
Yeah, the one Scout we've actually seen was probably one of the weakest applicants out of the entire batch of applications, to be honest. There's just no way to get him to admit under any circumstances.
Yeah.
I would basically agree with those numbers. I'm fairly confident that Heather's actually, I was a little concerned about whether or not she was actually going to do it, but I just talked to her the other day. So I'm confident, at least with the Americans, that at least 5 of them are doing it. But I would generally agree with those matriculation numbers that you just ran, Christy, that if we actually want to see the class get over the threshold of 20, we're hoping maybe to get a boost from Vietnam. We might have to be a little bit more negotiating on 1 or 2 of the really strong applicants. But as we've said, we don't want to start negotiating with fundamentally weak applicants who, it's a slippery slope real quick.
So what this means, Ruben, for you, this is the leadership and development specialization, because we're just, right, I think all of you know, but we're running just 2 specializations, the leadership and development and the linguistic one. So when we're talking about the PSK courses, the Vietnamese will go to the linguistic specialization. In this group of more general admissions combined with the AmeriCorps will be leadership and development. So this will be your group, Ruben, because Dan will have the other PSK course.
That's fine. 12, 14 students will be easier than last time.
Yeah.
And if the quality of the student is better, that will be great.
Well,
we're hoping. Having seen both rounds of applications, I do think while it is going to be a smaller class, it will be a stronger class.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about the packaging on this, and vis-a-vis our IPED scores, vis-a-vis HLC, and more especially vis-a-vis West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, which are tracking our numbers fairly carefully. And since we have another class coming in September, I'm wondering whether we can sort of say that we have 2 admissions moments during 2018, so that, for instance, Dan, when we file our IPED scores, Eric at Martin needs to be notified that we are experimenting with a double entry window, and so that they should account in this class the second numbers that are going to be coming in September. And certainly we can do this with West Virginia, because otherwise flags are going to go up that we've had a drop in our enrollment. And that requires...
This isn't counting Vietnam, though. So
Yeah, but even then, Christy, a 20% drop in enrollment sends up the flag on iPads, or maybe it's 25%.
Well, if I could suggest, because we're quickly using up the time for a term 1 meeting, and this is not term 1 academic stuff. So please, can we move that to, as somebody on the missions committee, I'm happy to have another call at noon that addresses that, and I'll do a little more due diligence on iPad numbers, etc. I think. Anyway, we've got some other stuff we got to cover on this call.
Okay. Dan, could you briefly go over what you wrote to me then, your summary of admissions from Vietnam? I think there is some relevance to this, since they're going to be enrolling in.
Can you see my screen share?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just scroll through this real quickly, and I'm mindful of Luke's point. But but this could double the size of the class. So I think it is a good footnote. We had 2 very important meetings last week with DOIT and the People's Committee, and we have approval to proceed. They have to exchange official papers. Meanwhile, IEEE has approved, but I see at least a month of lawyering ahead as we negotiate the contract where they pay Namganta University part of that money going to the scholarship kitty. Participants from last August's workshop, which was a pilot workshop, they now have permission to work on the essay prompt. They have that in hand. They have to submit it by Friday this week to Dr. Sun. And by Monday, those applicants will be vetted. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, I will have Zoom sessions with that cadre of applicants to get them to a point of submitting their applications by Friday, hopefully Thursday of next week. Pretty quick turnaround because TET begins on Friday, and gotta have it done before TET. So TET begins on the 16th. We expect from the officials at least 8 good candidates from Ganta. And in addition to that, we're allowed to give the essay prompt and invite more than that number to consider the master's program. Let me skip down to this paragraph. Getting people started on the 26th of February in the master's is important. Those will be our project assistants, and the workshop will be in March, and the online certificate class will begin in April. And then we'll have another workshop and another class in August and September, going all the way to December 31st. My goal would be to have 1 teacher from each of the 33 high schools of Ganta in the master's program, so that all 33 high schools are on the same plane with an advocate and a teacher leader. And this becomes the basis of making a very, very strong 2018 pilot year explanation of how we see it rolling out broader than just the high schools in Ganta. And to put it in perspective, this has become clearer for me in the last week. We have to show our comparative advantage. I mean, we have to really shine compared to the job that British Council and Pearson's Publishing have done over the last decade. They've charged the government of Vietnam many millions of dollars for a subpar approach to language learning. And what we're doing isn't just language learning, it's integrative sciences and case studies on so many subjects pertinent to the change going on in Vietnam while helping the nationwide project on bilingualism. So I think we will get there. It's quite a road ahead, quite a ride ahead. And for purposes of numbers, every day between now and the 26th is going to be very hard labor, but I'm optimistic that we will double your numbers, Christy.
Okay, so when you're, thank you, Dan. So when you're talking about the 33, 1 student representing each of the 33 high schools, so do you see then those 33 being over class 2019 and 2020? Like if we were to get 10
Yes.
now, we would have 23 in
That'd be
August?
my hope. That'd be my hope, but it might be 10 now, it might be 10 in August, and it might be 13 next year.
Okay, so from
But
what
my goal would be to get them all on board now, so that you don't have some high schools lagging a year behind the others.
Okay, so you said the applications will be completed on the 15th, you think, and I'm going to be out the 16th and 19th. Would an admissions committee meeting on the 20th be appropriate? Would that be soon enough?
Very much so. Yeah. What you won't have in hand because of TET holiday are transcripts, and you might not have immediately in hand letters of recommendation, but you should have everything else of the application.
Okay, Luke, we'll talk about that then with Jody. Okay, any questions for Dan, or should we, yeah, Kelly?
And just a process question. you decide whether you're going to allow them access prior to matriculation or what the call is going to be, because that's really pushing it towards the 26th.
Yep.
And just, I need that put down. We're
Yep.
allowing them in, they haven't paid, but we're allowing them in anyway. But we've got to
Yep.
keep that process
Yep.
obvious.
Now, I guess the question in all of that rollout, is there a way, Kelly, to let them into base camp but not into their actual ACC and PSK courses, that while we finish matriculating them to buy a week?
Well, base camp involves looking at your coursework and making a plan. So
I would say the equipment check, certainly. They would be part of the equipment check that week.
look, if you want to be technical about it, we can always kick them out. So, you know, use that as your stick if you want.
Let them start and have a deadline for all paperwork was honest and payments are in.
Yeah, I mean, usually if you get in, even if you pay a small fee, you have a month to get all of your, I mean, usually that's how it works. And then you get kicked out once the person who kicks you out realizes that you're still there. But we will, so.
Folks, don't kick these people out.
That reflects badly on you.
I'm going to kick some people in the teeth if you kick these people out.
That being exactly, and that's the whole point. I didn't want to create a hassle. We just have to have some kind of explanation for why they got a different entry door.
I don't think that has to be explained to anybody. What I am doing on a daily basis is putting in front of the Vietnamese our protocol. And I'm pushing it as fast and as hard as I can, but I also don't want to screw the whole project over protocol.
I agree exactly, Dan, and this is part of the point going back to this whole thing about specialization directors. I think the reason to have some executive role there is actually really to focus on the role, to the degree to which all the specializations are business model moves first and foremost.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so good point, Kelly. I think we'll, keep tracking that, but certainly I think they should be part of that, the equipment weekend, so that they can start logging on to everything. And so I suppose it would be enrolling them in all the LMS platforms before getting all of their admissions materials, like transcripts. So.
And Kelly, it will only be the master's students. The certificate students, they come further down the road.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I mean, that's fine. I'm just saying you're already talking about equipment check week. So even if you let them in on the 21st,
that's one day.
The rest of the week to check their equipment.
It's fine. I'm just saying it's good to have it in place that this is why we're doing this and have it spelled out. That's all.
Okay.
I'm happy for them.
All right. Let's move on to a few of the things that we discussed on Friday, just to see where we are and see what lingering concerns there are. What I see are three things that we talked about, pretty important issues, where the learning outcomes and how those are reflected and how they're linked to the activities and artifacts and how explicit we are about that, like in the syllabi. Learning streams, same kind of situation, how explicit we are with the students in those. And then the Zoom times are something that we had started, but not really, but not really concluded, I think, on Friday. Dan, did you have? Dan Westner? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand or something. Okay. All right.
No.
Okay. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to tell you where I think we left off, and then we'll go from there. With the points, and okay, let's go to learning outcomes. Of course, you saw my syllabus that had the extra column for connecting the learning outcome to the different activities and artifacts. And there was some pushback on that was just too, we don't need to be as explicit, but we do need to defend the types of activities and artifacts that we have in relationship to the learning outcomes. I think that's where we left it. Still pretty vague, but I don't think that the sense was that we needed to be as explicit as actually having a separate column in a syllabus and saying that this specific activity corresponds to this PLO or SLO. And yet we need to be able to, for example, for HLC or just for our own, for when that course is offered again, we need to be able to defend the choices of what we do in relationship to the learning outcomes. Comments on that?
I do think it's a really helpful process to ensure that your PLOs and your SLOs do connect to the 8 or the 18 weeks of the course, to the specific activities and artifacts. And in your explanation of an assignment that you say this relates to this PLO and these 2 SLOs. I think that's very important because it's a terrific process for an instructor to go through just to make sure they're staying on task. And for me as HLC narrator, it's a terrific document for me to point to that the faculty have been super conscious. The only thing I don't want to see is that we get heavy on the students with all this nomenclature. I would rather the syllabus be more artful than numeric.
So then where do you see that explanation happening?
In the explanation of the assignment.
In the explanation of the, so like on the Moodle course?
Sure. So, I think it should be in the syllabus because as we grow our number of courses, we're going to want to have a tight notebook or portfolio of all the syllabi to be able to make a very concise argument that the courses, the syllabi, all connect to the SLOs and the PLOs. So it can be further explained on Moodle if necessary. Again, this is helpful too for the students because they're coming from so many different national education systems. But I just don't want to be heavy-handed and keep hitting them with, now we're doing SLO 3, now we're doing PLO 5. Somehow we need to communicate it, but let's communicate it artfully.
Well, and I think we left it up to the faculty member how that communication happens.
Yes, I just want to make sure it's communicated, but that we not be too heavy-handed. I know it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but it's because we've got such diverse audience. We have the HLC on the one hand, and we have students of 20, 30, 40 countries on the other hand. And I think the highest priority is the students, but right after them, the priority is making it clear for evaluators at HLC who are completely unfamiliar with our approach to education. We can't be so unique that they just don't see it. I want them to be able to see it.
Okay, other comments?
Well, yeah, I agree that having him, I agree specifically with the point. It's a very useful exercise for you as a faculty member to be going back and tying to the learning outcomes. It's a similar type of thing. It's really easy to get in your head. Oh, I have three great assignments I have to give. Well, if they're all hitting the same learning outcome, maybe you need to back it off.
That's not great.
I also agree with the statement that I'm not as alarmed with whether, where and how we show the students, hey, this assignment is addressing these learning outcomes. I do agree with the point that students they're not going to be looking at that as much as our interpretation of the competencies for it. But also in terms of looking forward, and maybe I am, Kelly, if I'm opening up a can of worms here, just let me know. But since I've been spending every waking minute not on a Zoom session on Moodle in the past week or two, there's a lot of things that we can do, like, for instance, tagging competencies in association with an assignment. And I'm wondering if this is actually where we want to start to. For instance, if every assignment I've done on the back end is not visible to the student, maybe it's visible to the student, I don't know, but I have specified whether I called it a competency or a tag, purely just a tag, the learning outcomes that I believe that assignment is addressing. I think from the standpoint of building up a library, it does a couple of things. We can show HLC some of this stuff, but it also, I think on some level, and this is where I don't know enough about the access, but my question would be, if then a Term 4 faculty member comes along, could they somehow see all the different assignments that have had Learning Outcome 2 tagged in it, just to see what have others been doing, if we're thinking about building a database or library using this technology, I'm just wondering about a simple thing like a tag or a competency to sidestep this whole question, because I also agree that moving, the design of these courses is better done in Moodle and not on paper. So
I think Luke is.
Dad, before you respond, I want to hear if that's even possible from Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, all that is possible. I think I have been trying to get us to come to some like philosophical understanding of like the fact that we have learning outcomes, the fact that they're mapped to courses, the fact that they're mapped to artifacts. And we have a general understanding amongst us, all nodding, that that's what we're doing. We still have not a complete map. We still have not, I don't really care if it's the spreadsheet or not, because like Luke said, there's a lot of capacity within Moodle that we just don't utilize yet. But it seems a little early to be like, okay, now faculty, you've got to spreadsheet it and also tag it, and also until we come up with, one way or the other. What was my other point? And the thing I wanted to remind everyone was that when the students do their final portfolio, both every term and finally, they are returning to the learning outcomes as one of the features to kind of keep in mind when finalizing their portfolio. At least that was what I think, Christy, what we decided, how they're going to use how they're going to frame their portfolio. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, having it connected on the syllabus with the 1, 2, 3s is helpful for a student, because they can look back and say, oh, right, that activity 2 was supposed to have something to do with learning outcome 3. And, and it kind of helps them build that framework. So I'm not really worried. I mean, I think we're all going the right way. And I don't think, so I think Luke's right. I think Dan's right. I think Ruben's right, because he's got a really hard task of a syllabus that's so well interconnected that, it's like writing 3 numbers next to every activity. And that seems also sort of silly. So, I mean, I think we're in a good place. We're letting creativity and some individuality out there, but also giving a framework for those faculty that are going to come along that are going to say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Please give me some frame. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, Ruben.
What Luke just proposed, to me, makes sense, and it would be great for me, because I'm already doing that. There are several ways to organize the Moodle. You can organize by week. I organize it by competency. Okay, so 8 set of competencies. Each week, 1 competency or 1 set of very closely related competency. So I have the assignment for this competency. So I do not need to add a tag. I have assignments. I have the competencies. It's already done.
And
this is also.
Are you sorry, Dan? Just one question for Ruben. You're then connecting those competencies somehow to the learning outcomes?
There I have a question, because, for example, there is a learning outcome that we should, strengthen the presentation skills. Okay. Well, I think it doesn't make any sense to assign to each assignment if it address or not address the presentation skills, because the presentation skill is addressed, for example, in the e-portfolio, in so many things. So to get into that detail, I do have a problem. But if the decision is to go this way, I add the last column. No problem.
No, I mean, I don't think it's to show that every assignment has that. I think it's to show that there's that representation in the course. So, yeah, I mean, that is getting down too much into the weeds, I think, to have to show that, you know, presentation is represented in all of the assignments. I guess, I mean, I like what you're talking about with competencies. I guess the only thing I would say is that if there is some way of connecting those competencies that you have to the learning outcomes. I mean, even if it's, you know, it might just be obvious by looking at the two that there are links there, and then I think you've taken care of it.
Yeah, these competencies are the ones that, and this is a personal opinion, you know, because I did the curriculum, I did salary. These are the competencies that are needed to manage an organization. I don't know if these are the competencies that are needed to get a degree, a program, learning outcome. Okay, this is the, but I think they do. I think they do. Because, for example, in the case of presentation skills, one of the assignments is to present to your boss the statement of the financial situation of an organization. So if I need to add a column, yes, this fits with the learning outcomes presentation skills, I will. But I think that, you know, when a person organizes a curriculum, you know, and look at these PLOs, you know, the professor tried to have a balance, but also we have options, okay? So perhaps one student will select those options that they are good, you know, in presentation skills. They will select those, you know, and other will select. But, you know, it's my, I think, my responsibility as an instructor, when I look at the learning plans, to say to the student, look, you know, you should include this because it will help you, you know, but to make it mathematical, to make it deterministic, to make it in sort of percentage, you know, this is where it bothers me a little bit. But if I tell you I'm not going to make any trouble on this, if the decision to make that column, I will do that, no problem.
Well, I don't think we're saying we need to have a column. I think it's just showing that somehow those links are present.
Yeah, I want to enter this discussion with actually both feet. And I realize that it may be a bit disruptive, but I've been working very hard the last month to try to raise money. And one of the strongest fundraising arguments I have is to say that we are a competency-based institution. And I've developed a whole seat time versus competency argument. And this actually could bring in a substantial amount of financial support for the institution, this argument. Now, we're not to direct assessment of competencies. We haven't applied for that. But we went to some effort 2 years ago in our HLC special survey that was done to get grandfathered in as a competency-based institution. And as I'm listening to all of this discussion on learning outcomes, it occurs to me that a simple nomenclature change of our learning outcomes to learning competencies, and as I was listening to Ruben's presentation right now, that he is trying to achieve competencies and note them in his course design, is insofar as we can change our terminology from learning outcomes to competencies, and then over the next year or two be building a more rigorous assessment process for what is a competency and how do we measure competence, we are continuing to grandfather ourselves into a niche of higher education that I believe is appropriate to applied community change, which is our mission and our degree. So it fits better. But number two, it's going to bring in money. And Both are very, very important. And I realize that we may have pushback from the faculty who want to say this and process. But actually, that's why I say I'm jumping into this issue with both feet. And Dan, it's a really important issue for the HLC document. And I realize we're over time. I've got another call and meeting that's waiting that should have started at noon. I apologize. But this goes right to the core of my ability, and I think all of our ability, to raise money.
Can we, in that case, not rush? I'd love to hear Dan's response, but this is a hard enough hitting point. Do we need to have another meeting later today? Because I don't personally feel comfortable just getting off of a call, hearing that maybe we're making a shift like this and not knowing where there's.
I think this is a pretty big shift because we've already gone through this whole learning outcomes process, and really what we had before were more competencies. When I see competencies as being, I guess, a little bit more specific than what our our learning outcomes are right now.
I would propose to leave it as it is, you know, and add a column. And as we, I don't know if we did last year. I don't think we did last year. We didn't do that. But if, you know, we can do it this year. Well, and HLC will like that, that's fine.
Part of this comes from a concern that Jesse has. I mean, Jesse as director of assessment really needs to be part of this discussion, because he's saying now that we're taking away this direct assessment process of the direct assessment committee that has come in at the end of each term to do this assessment, we have to show that that on an ongoing basis we have a process of assessment, and that's why this was kind of a way of building in that assessment without having the committee come in afterwards and do the connections. So I definitely, if we switch, I think Jesse needs to be involved on you know, an ongoing discussion with this, with learning outcomes to competencies. And I think it's too much to try to switch right now. I think if we want to switch for the August start date, class 2020, I think that's great. I think that we're adding in so many different questions now for a class that's starting, that for courses that need to be done in the next week, and a class that's starting in 3 weeks, that we just can't open up the floodgates again and question everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just a little baby step towards that, because it's also a baby step towards the direct assessment. And I think that, you know, it seems to me you can kind of, similar to the way at last class we had a hybrid model that used both, you know, some practicum and some e-portfolio, that we can be doing a similar thing with this class, which is using the learning outcomes that have been approved. And I think to a model similar to what Ruben's doing, and some of this tie into assignments, can we as a collective faculty be articulating some actual competencies as we interpret the learning outcomes, and be kind of doing a horse race of both, to position us with a set of competencies built in directly to activities and artifacts in courses, so that we can show a logical handoff. I think at this point, you know, opening up this can of floodgates, more than anything, we get back to the debate between a difference between an outcome and a competency, and that's just not a worthwhile use of time right now.
Mm-hmm. May I have another comment? No, it's. I think, you know, we should stay as we are now, not making big changes. In my case, doesn't make. I do not have any problem. In fact, I do not have to add a column, because I have a column that describes the competency. So when I describe the competency that is going to be strengthened in this week, I can say this competency relates to PLO 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. So even I do not have to add another column. It's very easy.
Okay. Thank you.
I realize this is not the meeting, but I realize this is not the meeting to make this decision. But this is a very big deal, and I may be jumping in on it. And the simple solution from my side is if we just change the name, we can keep all the discussion of learning outcomes and all the decisions. We start calling outcomes competencies, and then over the next 6 months clarify how we're measuring them. But this is going to be a big deal to raise the money, folks. And it's maybe a situation where I'm asking the faculty to do a double step to get in line. And I haven't seen the HLC document, which I will see in a few days. And it may be just doing a global replace in that document.
Okay, I think Jesse needs to come in on this then, Dan.
Maybe.
Okay.
To fall in line is what I'm saying.
What's that?
I will address this at another case after this meeting, but this is, I think we need to keep in line the fundraising argument.
Okay. All right. Let's, okay. Another point of discussion then that we need to follow up on, and you'll be on that. Let's talk about the learning streams, and I'll tell you where I think we left off on the last meeting with that. We talked about face-to-face.
And I'm unfortunately going to have to leave this meeting. Sorry, folks.
Okay. Thanks for coming on. So we talked about defining face-to-face. Daniel had suggested including defining it with faculty mentored, peer instructed, and a local expert. So I think it's certainly broadening the definition of learning streams to more than just Zoom meetings, which I think is good. I mean, it's approaching it in a more substantive way, and it's more comprehensive, and it's not focusing so much on the tool, which is Zoom, but focusing on what we really are, the essential part of why face-to-face is important. So I'm okay with that. I think the other thing that we talked about was the relationship of points, and the way I thought we left it, which was maybe what I said, so that might just be what I'm remembering, is that we don't need to be explicit about points. I think we said that's hard, but we need to somehow show that each of these streams is represented in our course in an important, significant way. Now, whether that's with a paragraph like I had in my syllabus, whether it's showing that there's, that you have elements of each in the activities, I think that's okay. We don't have to do I think that still gets at the spirit of when we did the 20 point sequence with class 2017. Comments about that?
Yeah, I guess I agree on one hand that maybe we don't need to get as formulaic about the points, Christy. I definitely don't have an objection to that. I do think we want something a bit more than just saying all streams are represented on the one hand, just to kind of, I guess, if for lack of a better word, put a cap on certain kind of learning streams. It seems to me it's really easy to just overdo it. I mean, I'm in the middle of doing a course right now, and I keep reminding myself, you can't keep throwing a lesson in theory at them every single week. It just won't work. And I think that 2020 wasn't, we came up with it not from a minimalist standpoint of how many points, but actually thinking what's the maximum number, that if each faculty member was capped at assigning 40 points per stream, that was helping guarantee some equal representation. And so I don't want to harp on this too major, too big of a way, because you get to situations where a lot of the activity is done face to face, and then the artifact maybe is a lab or something, and that really is a case by case thing. I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, or would like to hear others' opinions about that, because I do think it, in the same way that the residential became a crutch or a catch-all, we want to be really careful that Zoom sessions and online work doesn't become a catch-all of some sort. So that's my only concern about moving away from a more formulaic point model.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah, Ruben.
I agree with your proposal, Christy. My main reason is that our responsibility as mentors is to help students, to learn and to get these competencies. Is to help them, with resources, to offering options for learning. These options are different for different learning styles. It's important to have options. It's up to the students to select what options. We cannot tell them you have to do this and this and this. At the end of the day, what we need to do is to help them to learn, to help them to get these competencies, and at some point to assess their learning, which is very difficult, but this is our responsibility. So to start discussing what is the best combination of learning streams, it's not, to me, the objective, doesn't make much difference to me if a student, uh, show me his or her learning, for example, with an excellent plan of human resource management for the organization. If she got this learning from face-to-face, Zoom, lab, it doesn't make any difference. Besides, it will be very difficult for me to assess that. So if the students show me that she or he has been able to present something, to do something that proves that he or she learned, to me, it doesn't make any difference if she learned this through different learning streams. What I am giving them is the options to use these various learning streams. And I will look at, this as a professor, as a mentor, to see if they are getting advantage of these learning streams, because perhaps they are not used to use something. Or they may be, for example, they may be, I don't know, they may be reluctant to get into the communities or into the other organizations. So I will tell the student, why don't you do that or that? But to do it, in a mathematical way, 20, 20, 20, to me, doesn't make too much sense.
Okay. Thanks, Ruben. Other comments? I think, Ruben, you're pretty much, I think reinforcing what we had said. I guess I can see that the learning streams you can look at them as being relevant when you think of different learning styles, because it's presenting learning in different ways. And so I guess one way is to ensure that every course does offer that possibility. I mean, I know even in class 2017, some students didn't go on the residential, so technically they weren't able to have the face-to-face element for that class. It was made up in a different way. So I guess just to make sure that each class offers a significant part of the class in that way for students to elect to go in that direction. Other comments or clarification on that? Are we all clear?
Well, I guess the question for me would actually be a question, separate from the teaching responsibilities or even the student perspective of that, because obviously we want to have some flexibility in all of this. And so a question I would have is the degree to which HLC will be looking at this. And Dan, you could probably speak to that. I had always been assuming, on some generic level, this is certainly how part of my simple description for the program, that we say, well, we have 3 streams associated with all the courses. And then each course is 3 credits. So basically, each credit is carried in a different stream. That makes a lot of sense to people. So that approximately, if you have 135 hours total, 45 is FaceTime, 45 is lab work, 45 is online. And so, and I had always thought on some level that while that generic formula is helpful to explain to a student what their learning experience would be, I'd always been under the understanding that HLC looked at that, and was going to actually want us to be able to show some justification for, like they do with program outcomes, and even distribution of credits. Now, if we have never actually in our statements ever said, 1/3 of this learning is face-to-face, or 1/3 of this is truly lab work, maybe that's just a condition we've put on ourselves that we can pull back from it a bit. But I do think it's an important point to clarify with Dan and the types of things that the HLC team might be looking for inside of the syllabi.
So it's important to explaining and justifying what distinguishes this program and follows from our mission of research, learning, and action. I think the streams within each course follow from the mission of research, learning, and action. The ACC, PRC, PSK distribution of courses of the 12 that a student takes follow from the mission of research, learning, and action. So that's where Eric and I have gone in explaining things to HLC. They're not looking for numeric equivalency of 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, but all of it is the coherence of research, learning, and action. Is that helpful?
I think so. I guess the question then becomes returning back to the conversation, since that's clarified the HLC concern, what are we going to do with this and how are we going to present it to faculty? I think, we have the struggles we have right now. Christy, I'm very worried about presenting a model like what you just presented to, say, our USIP faculty.
So what was the last thing that you said?
They would, as we've talked to like our USIP faculty, where they were already taking aspects of our model and just kind of going through semantics about it. And this is just going to double down on that.
Right. I don't think going forward we have to, well, if anything, in our assurance review, we say that we learned from the USIP experience that we need to be much clearer and insistent upon the pedagogy that follows from our mission. And it's not enough to have an affiliate faculty, even if it's somebody from USIP, to give lip service to it. So our mission is research, learning, and action. Our nomenclature is ACC, PRC, PSK. Our streams within each of those 3 types of courses are consistent: instruction, face-to-face, and community lab. Ultimately, students self-evaluate the coherence of that in their e-portfolio, and the institution explains and justifies the coherence of all of it by examining the deliverables. And the deliverables are the e-portfolio, and the deliverables are impact of community. Whether we delivered on our PLOs and SLOs, or in 9 months' time, our competencies, if we change the nomenclature there. But this is all rich, and we're small enough, and this program is tight enough that we can make this happen. But again, I'll just repeat a line that I said maybe an hour ago. I want it to come across elegant and artful, not formulaic.
Dan, well, I don't disagree with anything you've said. I think you've kind of helped bring it. It seems to me what is being proposed right now by Christy and Ruben moves us further from clarity about what the expectations upon visiting faculty would be, for these streams.
Yeah.
And now, I am not personally worried about Christy or Ruben or my ability to deliver on them. I think, since we're talking about this, and I'm certainly, maybe we get rid of them, but we've, as you say, we've got to be really clear coming out of this about what are these streams and why do they matter, and therefore where are they represented or how are they represented?
Now, I would agree with that, Luke. I think that's a bridge that we're going to have to cross when we get our contract faculty or adjunct. I'm not sure who will be the first one, but it was relatively, when we told them they had to have 20 points in each, that was clear, but at the same time our streams of learning were a lot more clear too, because they were online, residential, and community lab. And so by nature, I think it's going to become a little more fuzzy for them just because of the integrated streams. So I think we'll have to face that. It'll mean just being as clear as we can in the explanation and how we work with them. Because I just don't think
I hear you.
I don't think that we can go to a 1 credit for each stream. I think that would be an artificial type of designation, and it would be too restrictive for, I think, my class. I think for Ruben's class, it probably would be too hard to divide those into credits. So.
Okay, I'm just saying, as a result of this, I have less clarity about my stream distribution than I did at the beginning of the conversation. So I'm not disagreeing that we have to do it. I'm just saying, I'm a faculty member. I'm now asking for advice about what is my obligation for stream distribution, and can't wait till.
My advice is that you structure it in the way that works out best for you, but that it shows that you have. And if you want to put it into thirds, if that would help you, that you have a significant part of the class designated to each of those streams. So how you want to describe that, whether it's through points, you could stay with that point system is fine. Whether it's through more of a narrative description or different phases of the course, I think that's how we're going to have to. That's how we're going to have to do it, I think.
My conclusion, this is a good discussion. My conclusion.
I have someone at the door. I'm sorry. I need to make sure that Kevin gets out. I'll be right back. Sorry about this.
We're not allowed to speak to each other while Christy's gone.
Without the teacher in the room, Dan.
Yes.
We've also sort of got to decide on a timeline for the Zoom sessions. I'm very, I know we were going to talk about that later.
So I think Christy's latest syllabus, it's 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, -5 GMT. Luke?
I know, but
going to be at that time too? 8 o'clock EST?
Yes, as of now, that's what I'm tentatively going on. And I think that, my basic take is that we have got to establish base camp, and fundamentally, I think, talk a little bit more about a makeup policy or partial attendance policies. And then really ultimately, if we're going to move that time, I would want to see that move being done based on the vast majority of a doodle poll response of actual participants, as opposed to, just our collective. But, by and large, I think that we have, we've got to figure out a way to keep some mode aspect of flexibility in there. But fundamentally, I think set it and tell people you just got to get here. And for those of you who are always going to have to get off 15, 20 minutes early, you're generally going to always need to type up your feedback or type up your comments and submit it or something. I think.
I just think it seems very sort of unfair that we just randomly chose Thursday morning, and this one student really just can't make Thursday morning. We could have randomly chosen Wednesday morning or Friday morning, and she wouldn't have had a problem. And so I guess I'm sort of siding with the, well, what if we make it randomly Wednesday now? And so this one student, 1 out of 15, okay, so that's quite a large percentage. Just can't, you know, but you're right. I mean, if we move it for her, then probably someone can't make Wednesday and then someone can't make Friday. I understand that side of it too. But,
what do you think about a poll, like a survey of saying what day can't you make it, maybe?
We should ask the students.
See, because
there's no way this.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, what I don't know is when I put that email out is the one person said Thursday wouldn't work, but maybe maybe no one else said anything because it works for everybody else, and so there is no reason to I just don't know that. And yet, no, I'm with you, Kelly. It was random because Tuesdays doesn't work. It was kind of random, but Tuesdays don't work because of our meetings in the office. Monday and Fridays are never very good because Friday is Friday, Monday is right after the weekend. And so it's kind of between Wednesday and Thursday. And that's why I just picked Thursday.
Well, and this is the only reason why I think that on some level we have to tentatively announce something to get started. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to putting out a Survey Monkey poll to see if there is a time, say if by some chance Wednesday morning does work for everybody. And that being said, if truly the one person is Tristan, I know Tristan's boss very well. They've been a partner. They're one of our actual AmeriCorps partners. So Sarah Riley is. So I have no problem saying, Sarah, Tristan's going to be half an hour late for staff meeting for all term. But it could be, but that, so I think we want to get a sense of how much of a disruption is this, and also think, one idea I'd had looking at that time window we have is, okay, 8 to 10 o'clock is a long time. Is it possible that the 8 to 10 part is 100% mandatory and the 9 to 10 part is peer learning, group discussion, some aspect so that Tristan knows that being there for the first half all the time and then, doing some extra assignments for the second, or some aspect, because we've got to keep this flexibility, but we also can't let every single student's schedule just disrupt us over and over again. Dan, it looks like you're.
Oh, I agree. We need to make it as clear as possible, as soon as possible. These are the hours. And entering into graduate school, you're going to have to make some time changes, some commitments. We're trying to make this as feasible as possible. We're not asking them to drop their jobs, drop their families, drop their country, get a visa, get a passport. We're not asking any of that. So we can ask an employee to work out with their boss for the next 18 weeks. This is a schedule I need to try to keep to. And 2 hours is not a lot of time. I'm coming off programs where it was absolutely 100% requisite that students be online for 4 hours. And we gave a 15-minute break in the middle of 4 hours. I got no pushback on that. People wanted the degree. And they did 4 hours a week. And they took a 15-minute break, gladly. We all did.
Well, exactly. And so this is where I'm thinking, because one of my concerns is, okay, if Thursday fundamentally works well for everybody, it might not just be for 18 weeks, but for 22 months. But, and I do think, I have no problem calling Sarah Riley and saying, Sarah, how hard would it be to move your staff meeting? Or if Tristan's the only one, I want to wait, get some more response till I know that. But I think, and this is where I'm also thinking about the idea that she is fundamentally an outlier. And so if it's, Tristan, always be on for the first hour. And if you need to miss a couple extra Zoom sessions, make sure you get on the office hours. I'm just wondering, and I think it's great to hear from Tristan that she's been doing due diligence. She's clearly looking forward to starting the program. And I think she's being very conscientious, probably in some cases more conscientious than other students. But I also think an easy way to resolve this is by assuming that students who are in good academic standing and are keeping up with everything else, maybe we just won't hold them quite as accountable to Zoom participation. And the ones who are straggling, yeah, you better get on the Zoom participation because you need the extra help. Or, something more along these lines. I seldom think of, I know plenty of students who used to leave lectures 5-10 minutes early to get to another class on the other side of campus in bad weather or something. And their grade never reflected the fact they left early. So I'm just thinking about some easier ways to get around this bottleneck.
Other comments about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Christy? Oh, yeah. I'm always trying to see, our decisions looking at the future, not specific to any class or sort of student. And we all expect that in the future we will have okay, perhaps 50, perhaps 100. And we need to start thinking when we make decisions about our pedagogy to think about these numbers. Imagine the discussion. If we have a discussion, at what time we are going to have the face-to-face Zoom session for 14 students, imagine the discussion with 100 students. That means that we need to think a different way. First of all, we cannot ask all the students to stay in a Zoom session and give points just for staying in a Zoom session, or actively participate in a Zoom session if they cannot do it. Because with 100 students, there will be always 20 or 25 that will not make it, okay? So what we have to do is to adapt, the pedagogy. And in case of the Zoom sessions, we need to provide, first, recording the session, second, all the material available well in advance, and also some comments after the Zoom session among students, but we can't, the issue is not at what time, the issue is what is the purpose of the Zoom session. To me, we have to say it's Thursday or it's Wednesday, and that's it. Right. I think Thursday morning looks okay. Last time we didn't have too major problems Thursday morning. In some cases, we have low attendance, but there was not the issue of the timing, because initially everybody was there. At some point, perhaps they found that they were not attractive, and they start not participating. But it was not an issue. A main issue was not, to me, the timing.
And Ruben, once we have 100 students in a cohort, then we're likely to have 3 or 4 sections of a course. And students at that point actually have more flexibility if there is some sort of consistency across the sections.
5 or 4 sections, that means 4 times professor work?
Well, when we increase enrollment.
So it doesn't work, because the idea to move to a higher number is to make economy of scale. If we are going to...
This is graduate work. So there is an economy of scale, but there also is not mass production. If we go to mass production, we call it graduate school.
So, yeah. So I think we just call it Thursday. Dan already knew it was Thursday. The students already knew it was Thursday. It sounds like we've got a really good workaround for this one student, and I think we're right. All the doodle poll would be was Wednesday or Thursday better, and all it's going to give us is more options that we can't really afford to give students. So I think, Christy, you brought it up to the faculty, or just say, well, sorry, it's Thursday.
Yeah, Luke, maybe can you reach out to Tristan and Sarah about that?
Sure, I guess. So do we want to go ahead and tentatively say that this is, that we're definitely doing Thursday, and I can just, okay, I'll just send I won't even bring Tristan into the mix. I'll just send Sarah a simple email and say, hey, how big a deal is it for you to have an AmeriCorps at your weekly staff meeting, or how problematic is it if she walks in an hour late? Because 3 hours is a long bloody staff meeting.
Well, it's a workshopping kind of thing. And from my understanding with Tristan, it takes a while to get there. So she'd basically be opting out of the whole thing. So that's,
I've been to high rocks. I've been to the sessions. It's a team. It's like our Tuesdays, where it's the time for people to get together. And so, I mean, my basic point is that I think Heather should show up early. I mean, Tristan should show up at High Rocks ahead of time. If the internet's a little spotty, so be it. Participate for 2 hours and then join an hour late. I do see a workaround, or even anyway. I will email Sarah and get a sense of how catastrophically big a deal this is, and my guess is Sarah is going to respond and say, "Fine by me."
okay.
Knowing Sarah, but I'll check in with Sarah just about this, and then touch base with Tristan as well, because I think, we're always going to have some of this stuff happen, and maybe Sarah, I could easily see Sarah say, that they're, and anyway, I'll send an email to Sarah and smooth that over. I don't foresee it being a problem given how big a supporter Sarah's been of this program, and specifically Tristan's enrollment in it. So
okay, all right, thanks. Okay, I think I think the 8 to 10 is a good time. I think, Dan, especially when we switch to daylight savings time, that's going to be even better for the Vietnamese, 7 to 9 or so in the evening. I think that the other issue that we're talking about is the required nature of these. I think that we have to try really hard to emphasize the importance of them, because otherwise students won't come and we'll have the same issue before. And also, if you look at it as the flipped classroom kind of thing, you got to have students there to have a discussion. It's not just lecture for 2 hours. And if you don't have students there for a discussion, there's nothing to listen to on a recording. And so I think that, in some cases it's fine for them to skip and listen to a recording, but we can't emphasize that as an option, because everybody will choose it and there will be nothing to listen to. So with our small numbers, we have to highlight the importance of being there.
I have always been amazed and a little bit embarrassed by my own culture that it's the North American students who abuse the online privileges, not the international student, from where I sit. The international students bend over backwards, from my experience, to make the cohort gel. And the American students, when they're given more options with online features, they're apt to join class from Starbucks, or say, I've had a long day's work, so I'm going to join class from home tonight. And that to no end gave me frustration.
Well, we had a lot of trouble with class 2017 that didn't come to the Zoom sessions, but they were described as office hours, and so we weren't, there wasn't an agenda to them, or we didn't really build them up as being content-based and having, a real learning aspect tied to them. So, okay.
Yeah, I think, just Christy on that, I think we started the midterm, and from day one, they were never, I certainly never recruited. I recruited on the basis that we never had synchronous sessions. So, when you do things like that and then we change the midstream, it's, the problems are going to come up. And I think this idea of starting with base camp, starting every course with one, every course has them, the times don't change. There's no longer residentials. And so we just say, people did make an effort to get to residentials. So I think we've got, I'm not worried about laying down kind of firmly on that particular point.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
And just from a purely technical question, well, I'm aware that the student might have a Zoom room for base camp, and then they have another Zoom room for Luke's course, and they have another Zoom room for whichever PSK course they do. And ideally, we would have one Zoom room that those students could just be in. Well, anyway, just be aware that they're going to have to switch from one to the next, depending on which course they're taking. And that means, Christy, you're going to have to get into the ACC and the PSK course to do your team teaching.
Okay.
But I think that's really the only way to do it and still have hosting abilities and all of that. So I've been thinking about that, and that is really the only way to do it. So putting your Zoom, the Zoom link to the Zoom room that you're going to use for your Zoom sessions on your Moodle page would be helpful.
Okay.
Should we all be making one another TAs on our Zoom? Isn't there a way to do that? So that I could, when I logged on to Christie's, I would automatically be assigned as a TA.
Or is it a co-host?
A co-host, that's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably get there. There's a lot of other things that are happening.
Yeah, so that brings up the last thing, I think, is the structure of these sessions. And because of the PSK and ACC are these intensive 9-week sessions, we felt that the Zoom sessions every week are important in those courses. Mine not so much, because it goes over the 18, or the PRC over the 18 weeks. And with office hours, and the other things, I can justify the faculty contact hours. So my thought was that I would take, since you have 2 hours, I would take a couple times out of each of those 9 weeks, plus the last half hour of a couple of the sessions, and use it for the GSF course. Otherwise, we would be adding time. Now, maybe we're not expecting enough of students. I guess I'm just afraid of what we're going to get if we keep expecting more. And so I thought to require 2 hours a week of Zoom would be enough.
It's enough if there are enough other things that complement those 2 hours that get us up to Carnegie standards.
Mm-hmm.
And Carnegie standards are not out of thin air. They are well considered across the planet for graduate level inquiry and work. So I will work with the carve out of the 8 weeks that I have for PSK to allow you time for PRC time with the students. But I will have to make that up with pre-recorded or additional Zoom time. It's 3 credit hours. I need 45 hours of FaceTime one way or another with the students. I will count your hours towards the 45, but I'm not going to skirt Carnegie hours on this. That'll be a surefire way for the assurance review to flunk the rigor test.
Well, I mean, if you want, then I could just schedule separately. Just have the set ACC and PSK, those full 2 hours, and then I would schedule separately for GSF. I don't know.
Yeah,
when.
maybe.
I would.
Well, I think could you tag it 30 or 45 minutes before the start of the PSK class, or 30 minutes following the PSK after we have daylight savings time?
My thought is that we have to establish this habit of every week setting aside two hours. I mean, it's just
that's a good habit.
Yeah, and so to tag something on here or there, I just don't think would work. And I thought that there might be enough flexibility. I don't know that every course was going to use that 2 hours, because we just haven't done that before. And
Really?
So, Luke and Ruben, will you use that 2 full hours every week? I mean,
initially, yes, when I have 15 or 20 people, but I'm not going. I didn't spend 2 hours with 1 or 2 students. At the end, the students were all working heavily, trying to, finish assignments, and they didn't come, to the, and as far as I checked with other professors, and all of them were having the same problem. So I end up with 5 students, perhaps 5 or 6 at the end, which 1 hour was plenty of time, with them, because I was not going to be teaching anything. I was asking questions. But at some point they were not. They were waiting for me to say something. That was the end of the meeting.
And we did. You got Christy and Luke. We did sit down and write out the hours and went through this whole thing of trying to make sure that we had enough hours on each course specified and how we were going to make up those hours. So we do have some documentation on going through that process. And what we found with the PSK sequence is that, we already had quite a few contact hours built in on the base camp and the wrap up that you almost didn't need. Sorry?
The
PRC, not PSK.
Yeah.
Sorry, PRC.
Yeah.
That you almost didn't even need any more contact hours to get up to the 45. Obviously, we need Christy to check in with them, throughout the course just to keep the ball rolling.
And that's what it really is, checking in with them, asking if they have questions, saying, because they're there at once, if you have questions, then let's schedule a separate office hours. It's the checking in. Maybe I don't even need a half hour. What I'm concerned about is that they just develop that habit of those same 2 hours every week. And then I, even as the CAO, I'd like to be in on some of that to touch base. And so if you have questions at that time, they can ask me. So that's my rationale behind this. It's not to take time away from your course.
And the idea was that it would be team teaching, that it would be a session that would utilize both faculty being there. And like you said, Dan, it's going to count towards your 45 hours. So I was hoping it was going to be more of a synthesis situation as opposed to sort of a feeling like we're sort of getting in on your space.
Yeah.
Right. No, synthesis and co-teaching would be optimal. We're not going to count 30 minutes in a PSK 2-hour section towards both PRC and PSK. If Christy steps into my class during its assigned 2 hours, I'm thinking that works towards the 2 hours for the PSK course. Christy, if you're just asking them, if you're just checking in and showing face, which is very, very supportive and important, just being there and being part of the chat line in the course, that's terribly important.
Well, let's see how it goes with Luke.
Please don't take 30 minutes out of class time for PSK, because those courses are just 8 weeks long. That's 16 hours of online, and that is 1/3 of the 45 that would have to be shown for Carnegie purposes.
Luke, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'm not at all concerned about hitting my 45 hours of FaceTime as a total because of Dan's point about pre-recorded lectures. I've got hours of footage. And I'm in a lucky position that I've got lots of videos of Dad lecturing in the past, or giving PowerPoints, or myself, or pre-recorded Zoom sessions from other courses, etc. And all of which I'm bringing in, and I'm building it directly into lessons so that I can track, the actual amount of time the student was engaged with that content, the minimum amount of time they spent on the lesson, and so I am between that and the Zoom sessions and the office hours. I'm certain we're going to go over 45. Related to the Zoom session, I think it doesn't need to be 100% one or the other. By and large, I think because I've got so much of, my hope is to have, with the exception of some starting remarks and some concluding remarks by me or Dad, that all of our Zoom sessions are lifetime facilitation, and usually those, lessons will have prompt questions or even kind of assignments, thought exercise. We'll tell them, hey, here are going to be this week's discussion questions as they related to the reading, and think about these, come with prepared answers. do a short response question that I can look at ahead of time to use all of that in a facilitator role. And so that also being said, I think that at least in a number of instances, having the direct tie-in with PRC is really important, because certainly as I get like into my lab work, ultimately I would like to see all those artifacts reflected on the e-portfolio. And so I think a really good, we just spent an hour and a half team talking about their community profile that they've been working on. And for you to also tag into that discussion with, okay, when this is done, how does it go on your e-portfolio? How to help prompt some of the synthesis and the uploading throughout, so they are kind of connecting these dots. We're not saving it all for that final week, especially in my course, which, my synthesis week is 8 weeks after my course was taught. So I think that, I'm very happy to have that, because it then moves, it saves kind of the last half an hour of the Zoom session for a collective move to look off of Moodle and onto Mahara, shall we say, to look at that and look at it across job, academic learning, and ask, and maybe, once again, I don't see this as being very clinical or guided, but suddenly the last half an hour of facilitation discussions is, how did people feel this is best represented on their e-portfolio? Does anybody want to share? Can we exchange those to get those who are straggling, to do it? So, obviously I'm still getting there as far as what the each week's Zoom is going to exactly be about. And I think some it's much more related than others, but on the whole, I think this will be a nice tie-in to also, for me as a faculty member, becoming full circle with PRC and the e-portfolios in a way that would otherwise be good.
Yeah, I like, thank you, Luke. I like Kelly's suggestion of seeing how it goes with your ACC course, because actually with the PSK, there are going to be 2 PSK courses going on, and I can't be 2 places at once. So I will have to think through that a little bit more, how to integrate or interact with Dan's class and with Ruben's class, because yes, Dan.
No, let me do this correctly. I can't. I was going to raise my hand. Oh, there it is. Okay, there. Okay. How'd I do, Kelly? The comment that you just made raises a really nice possibility that sometimes the PSKs meet on a bit larger Zoom session, so that there's some cross discussion, what they've gotten out of nonprofit and what they've gotten out of theory and practice of language acquisition. I'm just thinking out loud as you were saying you can't be in 2 places at one time. No, you shouldn't. You should be in one place, but maybe we could bring 2 PSK sections together once or twice, just so they see each other and remember that they're on track differently.
Right. Okay, yeah.
Again, we have to think creatively without having that face-to-face time in the residential, and we've got to take something 2-dimensional like this laptop screen and turn it into reality.
Well, so yeah, I like that. I mean, obviously the place where all the students come together is PRC, but if I don't have separate Zoom sessions, then they're not getting that feeling of being all together. So it's either taken a couple times, combining the 2, or me having a separate, completely separate course with them. So
yeah. And for the Vietnamese teachers, for them to understand why we've got 17 people studying with Ruben on nonprofit management, and Ruben, if that could even be done on a time when Dr. Sun is right there in class with the students in Ganta, and you're right there on the screen, some really fun relational lifelong development cadre kind of stuff begins to emerge.
okay.
I don't want. We're talking about a monetized partnership-driven list of specializations, which is likely to increase. But we don't want people to veer off on some specialization and lose sight of the importance of integration.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Especially if we want them to be part of the network, Future.org, at the end of this. We want teachers to know what they're going to get out of a lifelong relationship with people who aren't teachers.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are good ideas.
Okay. All right.
So just to conclude, it sounded like on the PSK PRC integration, there's kind of two options on the table, and maybe Christy, you decide in partnership with the two faculty members based on maybe halfway through the ACC course. One is kind of for you to spend, in the second half of the term, do like 4 sessions with Ruben and 4 sessions with Dan, and then I think another very creative one, that's obviously slightly different format from how we would be using the ACC PRC integration, which is to bring all the PSK courses together. And I think that both would be very useful, and I think and we're still using time very efficiently. I think one of the biggest things on this point of the need for a 2-hour Zoom goes down dramatically if faculty are really trying to the best of their ability to be getting as much pre-recorded lecture material and that type of thing out ahead of time, so that at least some of that can be done in a non-synchronous format, so that the synchronous sessions are being used for rich discussion and integration type.
Yeah.
Yes, or breakout room.
Mm-hmm.
Using Zoom for breakout room.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, and I actually, in a couple of my assignments, I call for students to meet together in groups. So that's where I need to figure out, I guess, how they'll do that. If we need to start out with one big meeting and then have them break out into groups, then in that case, I probably would need to schedule a separate time. With them.
I think what Dan proposed is a good idea to mix both groups, if I understood well. But we need to. This is a decision. We need to think about it. It's not just a matter of, oh, this is a good idea, let's go. Because for some reason, for example, the students in Vietnam were not asked to take nonprofit management. For some reason, it's not part of their program. Okay. Now, if they go to a Zoom meeting and join a group that they have been studying or working on nonprofit management and getting the terminology and getting the concepts, and we are using some language that we suppose that all the students know about and understand, the other group will be lost. We need to be careful unless we prepare a whole session about a topic and say, okay, this will be a joint session. We will have another group of students that has not been involved in nonprofit management, but there are some links, So it is not something that we can decide and say, oh, it's easy to do. It requires some planning. So it's great that we have this idea on the table. Perhaps the discussion is a bit late, a few weeks before starting the course.
Well, Ruben, have Vietnamese students studying nonprofit management is because Vietnam doesn't have nonprofits.
Seriously?
They've got a communist party.
Oh. I never really thought of that before.
Well, we can.
But I still want them to see your face, and I still want them somehow to learn from you. And one question, I suppose, is whether we could give all the students access to all PSK material, whether that's the PSK they're enrolled in or not. Part of the Bending Bamboo project is to create a flip book for each of the courses. And that flip book would be part of our Future Generations library, which your students, whether they're in our courses or not, would have access to, could read and learn from. We're very much at a modeling stage and an imagining stage. So let us pull a couple of those together and then open it up to Dean's Council and Faculty College for constructive critique. But I'm very much a fan of letting the students steadily see and learn from the other specializations, because we need to build up to why they would want to be part of a lifelong Future.org network.
All right, that's good to continue thinking about. I think we've gone on for 2 hours, so I think we've probably about reached our capacity, attention
This is what a
span.
2-hour Zoom class feels like.
Yeah, that's okay, exactly. This is.
And at this point in my other classes,
You'd
we
have to
take a
wait.
15-minute break and we do 2 more hours.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, well, I think that we clarified some things. Paula had to duck out a little bit after noon, and so I'll work with her in getting the minutes, and so we can have that to be able to refer back to. So thanks for joining, and we'll go from
I'm
here,
around.
and we'll have class. Dan, let's see, you're not going to be on the mountain. I guess no one's going to be.
I will figure out when I'm going to be on the mountain when we get our exact workshop and
Okay.
such directive.
Okay.
So any day we'll have those dates, and then I'll figure out when I'm on the mountain.
All right.
Any day now.
Okay, well,
Exciting.
thanks a lot, you guys, for joining, and thanks for all your work. We'll see you later.
What is the weather report?
What's that?
What's the weather report for North Mountain?
Well, Stephanie is up there right now. I just didn't have time to go up because a meeting was starting pretty soon. She said it was, the driveway was passable. There was still some snow and a little ice on the street, but it's passable.
But she didn't go up this morning.
She
She went
did.
home.
Well, that she
No, she
went up-
didn't. And then she went back. So
Oh, is she back home now?
yeah.
No, she
Well,
said.
this morning when she sent that message, she said she had gone home.
Well, then she just went up at
Yeah,
11.
Yeah, that was going up again.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she's up there now.
Christy, if you look outside, I think your snow has melted.
Oh, there it is melting. The sun's out.
See, that happened. So you should be able to get out of your house.
It's not the snow, it's the ice.
Yeah, I just.
All right, you gotta go.
Yep, bye.
All right, we'll see
Bye-bye.
you later. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.